The dust in Redemption Springs didn't just settle on things, it buried them. Secrets, lies, bodies. The last teacher to work in this town found that out the hard way. One day he was ringing the school bell, the next, he was gone, vanished, as if the dust had just swallowed him whole. So when Olivia Zimmerman stepped off the eastbound stagecoach in the simmering heat of 1875, she wasn't just a curiosity. She was a question mark, and everyone in town was waiting for the answer. She clutched her threadbare bag to her chest, a useless shield against the dozens of eyes that tracked her every move. One eye blue as a prairie sky, the other green as new grass. It was the first thing they noticed. And in a town like Redemption Springs, the first thing they noticed was the first thing they hated. A woman whispered to her friend, loud enough to be an announcement. "Look at her, marked from the start." Olivia kept her head down. She'd been hearing whispers like that her whole life. Born an oddity, orphaned at 12, passed around like a worn-out coin until no one was left to take her. Now, at 22, she was here, her last resort, answering an ad for a teacher in a town so desperate they'd hire a ghost if it could hold a piece of chalk. But desperation had a dark side. A town that would hire anyone might also be a town that would do anything. The boarding house smelled of boiled cabbage and judgment. Mrs. Holloway, the matron, had a face like a clenched fist. She took Olivia's money, her fingers lingering on the coins as if checking to see if they were real. "I run a respectable house," she said, her voice a dry rustle. "No gentlemen callers, no noise, church on Sunday." She looked at Olivia's eyes, and a flicker of something ugly passed over her face. "Your room is at the top of the stairs, the small one." Her lips tightened. "It'll do for someone like you." The words were a familiar sting. Someone like you, an outcast, a stray. The words followed her up the creaking staircase, whispering from the shadows in the hall. The room was a little more than a closet with a bed. The single window looked out over the livery stable, a world of mud and sweat. Olivia sank onto the lumpy mattress, the weight of the town pressing down on her. Coming west had felt like a chance to escape. But as she stared at the cracked water basin, she had a sinking feeling she hadn't escaped anything at all. She'd just walked into a bigger cage. The next morning, the schoolhouse looked like a forgotten memory. Its roof sagged like a tired old man's shoulders, and the windows were patched with greasy oilcloth, making the light inside dim and uncertain. Mayor Thompson met her there. He was a portly man whose face was a permanent shade of sunburned red. He didn't shake her hand. "Term starts Monday," he grunted, jingling a set of keys. 20 pupils, give or take. The last teacher couldn't handle it. Left in the middle of the night. He gave her a long, slow look, his eyes lingering on her face. "Can't say I blame him. This is a hard place for people who don't fit." He didn't have to say what he meant. Her eyes were a liability, a sign that she was different, breakable. "I'll do my best," Olivia said, her voice smaller than she wanted it to be. "We'll see," the mayor said, the words a dismissal. "Town meeting tonight, at the church. Let folks get a look at what we've hired." It wasn't an invitation. It was a summons. He wanted to put her on display, to let the town pick her apart before she'd even written a single letter on the blackboard. He was testing her. He wanted to see if she would break. The church was packed, the air thick with the scent of unwashed bodies and simmering resentment. Olivia sat in the back, trying to shrink into the rough-hewn pew, but she could feel their eyes on her, crawling over her skin. When Mayor Thompson called her to the front, the whispers erupted into a low roar. "A witch!" someone shouted from the back. "Those are devil's eyes," another voice declared. A woman clutching a small child stood up. "My boy won't be taught by the likes of her. She ain't natural." Olivia stood frozen, the hatred of physical force pushing her back. She tried to speak, to tell them about her degree from Boston, her qualifications, her passion for teaching, but her words were drowned out by their fear. Mayor Thompson let the chaos swell, a small, cruel smile playing on his lips. Finally, he banged his gavel. "Seeing as she's all we've got," he announced, "she'll have to do. For now." The threat was clear. She wasn't their teacher. She was a placeholder. A temporary fix until someone better, someone normal came along. As she walked back to the boarding house under a sky full of cold, distant stars, she felt the weight of their judgment like a shroud. She hadn't just taken a job. She'd walked into a war she had no idea how to fight. The first day of school was a trial by fire. The children stared, their faces blank masks reflecting their parents' prejudice. A 14-year-old boy, bolder than the rest, raised his hand. "My pa says your funny eyes let you see things folks ain't meant to see. Is that true, Miss Zimmerman?" The room filled with cruel giggles. Olivia felt the heat rise in her cheeks, but she kept her voice steady. "I see a classroom full of children who are here to learn," she said. "Let's begin." She tried to teach them, to break through the wall of suspicion with stories and numbers, but it was like throwing pebbles against a fortress. Some parents pulled their children from the school entirely. Others sent them with warnings to watch her, to report anything strange. She was alone, an island in a sea of hostility. Then, one afternoon, as she was writing on the blackboard, the world exploded. A rock crashed through the window, showering the floor with glittering shards of glass. She shoved the children to the far side of the room, her heart hammering against her ribs. Through the broken pane, she saw 3 teenage boys running away, their laughter echoing back like a curse. "Witch!" one of them screamed. "Go home!" That night, as she swept up the last of the broken glass, the silence of the empty schoolhouse was deafening. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Every creak of the floorboards was a footstep in the dark. She was just about to leave when she heard it. The soft crunch of boots on the gravel outside. Then, a knock on the door. Her blood ran cold. She thought about not answering, about hiding under the desk until morning. But something made her walk to the door and pull it open. A man stood there, silhouetted against the dying light. He was tall, his shoulders broad under a worn leather jacket. He took off his hat, revealing sun-streaked hair and a face carved by the wind and the sun. "Heard there was some trouble," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Thought I might lend a hand." She stared at him, suspicion coiling in her gut. No one in Redemption Springs offered help, not for free. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Xavier," he said. "Flynn Xavier." He gestured at the broken window with his hat. "I can fix that. Got some spare glass up at my ranch." "Why would you help me?" she asked, her voice sharp. "No one else has." His eyes, a warm, steady hazel, met hers. And for the first time since she'd arrived, someone looked at her without flinching, without a flicker of disgust or fear. "Because it's the right thing to do," he said simply. "And because I don't hold with running people off just because they're different." His kindness felt more dangerous than the town's hatred. It was a trick. It had to be. In Redemption Springs, nothing was ever what it seemed. And a man appearing out of the dusk to offer help to the town pariah? That wasn't kindness. That was a trap. Flynn Xavier returned the next day, just as he promised. He didn't just bring glass. He brought lumber for the broken steps, a can of paint for the peeling door, and a quiet competence that was both reassuring and deeply unsettling. He worked with an easy, practiced rhythm, his hands sure and strong as he measured, cut, and hammered. Olivia watched him from the doorway, a war raging inside her. Part of her was grateful, a tiny, starved part that craved any crumb of human decency. But the other part, the part that had survived by trusting no one, was screaming at her to run. "You're staring, Miss Zimmerman," he said, not looking up from his work. "I was just wondering," she said, her voice stiffer than she intended, "why you're doing this." He stopped his hammering and straightened up, wiping a sheen of sweat from his brow with the back of his hand. He looked at her, his hazel eyes seeming to see right through the walls she'd built around herself. "My mother was Shoshone," he said, his voice quiet. "Folks in this town never let her forget it. They never let my father forget it either. She used to say that belonging isn't about fitting in. It's about finding the place where your heart can be quiet." His words hit a little too close to home. It felt like he was reading her mind, plucking her deepest fears and desires out of her head. "You remind me of her," he added, his gaze softening. "You have that same look in your eyes, like you're ready to fight the whole world if you have to." Before she could process this, the schoolhouse door swung open with a bang. Mayor Thompson stood there, his face a thundercloud. His eyes flicked from Olivia to Flynn, and his expression curdled into a sneer. "Xavier," he said, the name an insult. "Just helping the new teacher with some repairs, Mayor," Flynn replied, his tone deceptively mild. But there was an undercurrent of steel, a challenge that didn't go unnoticed. The mayor ignored him, his piggy eyes fixing on Olivia. "Miss Zimmerman, a word. Outside." He didn't wait for an answer, just turned and stomped out. Olivia's heart began to pound. She followed him into the dusty schoolyard, the late afternoon sun casting long, ominous shadows. "You do well to stay away from him," the mayor hissed, not bothering to lower his voice. "His kind are trouble. His mother's blood makes his loyalties questionable." "His mother being Shoshone doesn't make him a bad person," Olivia shot back, surprising herself with her own fire. The mayor's face darkened. "This isn't Boston, Miss Zimmerman. Out here, blood matters, just like your peculiarities matter." He took a step closer, his bulk intimidating. "The school board is meeting again. They're thinking of writing to Sacramento for a proper teacher, someone without complications." "I have a contract," she said, her voice trembling. He laughed, a short, ugly sound. "Contracts can be broken." He turned and walked away, leaving her standing there, the dust settling around her feet. When she went back inside, Flynn was packing his tools. He took one look at her face, and his expression tightened. "Let me guess," he said. "That wasn't a social call." "They're going to fire me," she said, the words hollow. "They think I don't belong here." "Then they're fools," Flynn said, his voice fierce. He stepped closer, and for a moment she thought he was going to touch her. "This town doesn't deserve you, Olivia." He used her first name, and it sounded strange, intimate. He paused, then looked toward the east road. "If you need anything, my ranch isn't far. Just follow the split rail fence with the carved X." He left, riding off into the setting sun like a hero in some dime novel. But as Olivia stood there in the quiet schoolroom, a cold dread crept over her. Flynn Xavier wasn't a hero. He was a complication. And Mayor Thompson hadn't just been giving her a warning. He'd been drawing a battle line, and she was standing on the wrong side of it. The following weeks were a strange mix of small triumphs and simmering dread. A few of the children started to thaw, their curiosity winning out over their parents' warnings. Olivia discovered a love for poetry in a shy girl named Lucy, and a surprising talent for mathematics in a boy named Samuel. These tiny victories were her armor against the glares and whispers that followed her through town. She worked tirelessly, arriving at the schoolhouse before dawn and leaving long after dusk, trying to prove her worth through sheer force of will. One evening, she was so lost in her lesson plans that she didn't hear the horse approach. A knock at the door made her jump. It was Flynn. "It's getting late," he said, his hat in his hands. "I was passing by. Thought you might want a ride back to town." Her first instinct was to say no, to keep her distance, just as the mayor had warned. But the thought of the long, dark walk back to the boarding house, with every shadow feeling like a threat, made her reconsider. "I wouldn't want to cause any gossip," she said weakly. Flynn smiled, a slow, easy smile that made her stomach flutter. "Gossip will find a way. Whether you're walking or riding, might as well be comfortable." She let him help her onto his horse, her hand briefly touching his. His skin was warm and calloused, and a strange jolt went through her. The ride was quiet, the only sounds the creak of the saddle and the steady clopping of the horse's hooves. He dropped her off in front of the boarding house, helping her down. His hands lingered at her waist for a second too long. "Good night, Miss Zimmerman," he said, his voice low. "Olivia," she heard herself say. He smiled again. "Olivia," he repeated, and the way he said it made her feel like she was hearing her own name for the first time. She watched him ride away, a confusing mix of fear and something else, something warm and dangerous, blooming in her chest. The next morning, Mrs. Holloway was waiting for her in the dining room, her arms crossed, her face a mask of disapproval. "I saw you last night," she said, her voice dripping with accusation. "With that Xavier man, I told you, no gentleman callers." "He just gave me a ride," Olivia explained, feeling like a child caught breaking the rules. "His kind don't mix with respectable folk," Mrs. Holloway sniffed. "His mother was a savage. He's after something, girl. Mark my words." The warning echoed in her head all day. Was Flynn just being kind? Or was Mrs. Holloway right? Was he after something? The question was still tormenting her when she arrived at the schoolhouse to find a group of parents waiting for her. Their faces were grim. Mrs. Peterson, whose sons were her most difficult students, stepped forward. "Miss Zimmerman, we need to talk." Mr. Jenkins, the blacksmith, a mountain of a man with hard, unforgiving eyes, spoke next. "It's about your conduct." Olivia's blood ran cold. "What concerns do you have?" "You're filling our children's heads with nonsense," Mrs. Peterson snapped. "Poetry and stories about places they'll never go." "And worse," Mr. Jenkins boomed, his voice echoing in the small schoolyard. "You're carrying on in public with that half-breed Xavier. It's a disgrace." "I am not carrying on with anyone," Olivia said, her voice shaking with rage. "Mr. Xavier helped with repairs. He gave me a ride home, that's all." "It doesn't matter," Mrs. Peterson said, her eyes cold. "Between your strange ways and his tainted blood, you're trouble. You don't belong here." The words were like a physical blow. She looked at their closed, angry faces and knew it was over. "The school board is meeting tonight," Mr. Jenkins said, his voice final. "I think you know how the vote will go." They left her there, the dust swirling around her ankles. She felt a strange sense of calm settle over her. The fight was over. She had lost. She taught the rest of the day in a daze, going through the motions, her mind a million miles away. When the last student had left, she sat at her desk, waiting. She didn't have to wait long. She heard the familiar sound of his horse and looked up to see Flynn dismounting. He walked into the schoolhouse, his face etched with concern. "I heard," he said. "It's a small town." "They're firing me tonight," she said, her voice flat. "It seems my association with you was the final straw." Flynn's jaw clenched. "This isn't about me. Not really. They were looking for an excuse." He moved closer, his presence filling the small room. "They're wrong, Olivia. About everything." He looked at her, his hazel eyes intense. "I see you. I see your strength, your fire. I see your beautiful, mismatched eyes that see the world in a way they're too blind to understand. Her heart started to pound, a frantic, trapped bird in her chest. Flynn, don't. I'm coming to the meeting tonight, he said, his voice a low growl. I'm going to speak for you. Why? She whispered. You'll only make it worse for yourself. He laughed, a short, bitter sound. I've been an outcast my whole life. I know how to stand my ground. He reached out and gently brushed a stray piece of hair from her cheek. His touch was like a spark on dry tinder. They can't see your worth, Olivia, but I do. His words hung in the air between them, a promise and a threat. He was offering her an alliance, a shield. But in Redemption Springs, accepting help from one outcast only made you a bigger target for everyone else. Going to that meeting with him wasn't just a risk, it was a declaration of war. The walk to the church felt like walking to her own execution. Flynn was beside her, his presence a solid, comforting weight, but it did little to stop the whispers that followed them like hungry dogs. They sat in the front pew, a deliberate act of defiance. Mayor Thompson stood at the pulpit, his face flushed with righteous anger. We are here, he boomed, to discuss the continued employment of Miss Zimmerman. One by one, they stood up. Mrs. Peterson, Mr. Jenkins, others she didn't even know. They talked about her eyes, her fancy Eastern books, her blatant disregard for the town's morals. It was a character assassination, each word a carefully aimed stone. When they were finished, the mayor turned to her, a smug look on his face. Do you have anything to say for yourself, Miss Zimmerman? Olivia stood, her legs shaking. She looked out at the sea of hostile faces. I came here to teach, she said, her voice clearer than she expected. I came here believing your children deserved a chance to see a world bigger than this valley. Yes, my eyes are different, but my heart is the same as yours. I had hoped to find a home here. Her voice broke on the last word. She sat down, her cheeks burning. Flynn squeezed her hand. Then he rose to his feet. This matter doesn't concern you, Xavier, the mayor snapped. Oh, it concerns me, Flynn said, his voice ringing through the silent church. It concerns me when this town, which calls itself Redemption, decides to crucify a good woman because they're afraid of what they don't understand. He turned to face the crowd. My mother was Shoshone. She was the wisest, kindest person I have ever known. And many of you treated her like dirt because her skin was a different color. Now you're doing the same thing to Olivia because her eyes don't match. He pointed a finger at Mayor Thompson. You talk about morals, Mayor, but what's moral about crushing a person's spirit, about driving away the one person who is trying to give your children a future? His gaze swept the room, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of shame on some of their faces. Miss Zimmerman isn't the problem here, Flynn said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. The problem is the rot at the heart of this town, the secrets you're all keeping. A shocked murmur went through the crowd. What secrets? What was he talking about? Mayor Thompson's face went pale. That's enough, Xavier. You're out of order. But Flynn wasn't finished. He turned to Olivia, his eyes blazing with an emotion she couldn't name. He took both of her hands in his. Olivia Zimmerman, he said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. I don't care what these people think. I know who you are, and I know where you belong. He took a deep breath. You belong with me. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. Olivia stared at him, her mind reeling. If this town won't have you, he continued, his voice thick with passion, then we will make our own town, our own home, just the two of us. Mayor Thompson slammed his gavel down. This is an outrage. Your contract is terminated, Miss Zimmerman. And as for you, Xavier, you get out of this church. I want you both out of this town by morning. But before anyone could move, a new voice cut through the chaos. It was Harold Jenkins, the blacksmith, the man who had led the charge against her. He stood up, his face troubled. "Now, hold on a minute, Mayor," he said. "I didn't agree to that." Another parent stood, and another. A tide was turning. The children had been talking, whispering about the teacher who read them poetry, who didn't laugh at their mistakes, who saw something in them that no one else had. Amid the growing arguments, Flynn kept his eyes locked on hers. "Did you mean it?" she whispered, her voice lost in the noise. "Every word," he said. "But this is your choice, Olivia. You came here to be a teacher." She looked at the divided town, at the anger and the confusion. And then she looked at Flynn. He wasn't just offering her a home. He was offering her a fortress. "Ask me properly," she said. A slow smile spread across his face. And right there, in the middle of the chaos, with the whole town watching, Flynn Xavier dropped to one knee. "Olivia Zimmerman, will you marry me?" Before she could answer, a side door to the church burst open. It was the sheriff, his face grim. "Mayor Thompson," he said, his voice cutting through the noise like a blade. "You're under arrest." The entire church fell silent. The mayor sputtered, his face turning a blotchy purple. "On what charge?" The sheriff held up a ledger book. It was the journal Olivia had seen in the schoolhouse, the one that had belonged to the teacher who vanished. "On the charge of fraud, embezzlement, and the murder of Thomas Miller." The name hit the room like a physical blow. Thomas Miller, the teacher who had disappeared. Mayor Thompson wasn't just a bully. He was a killer. The town of Redemption Springs hadn't just been suspicious of Olivia. It had been hiding a murder. And she had just agreed to marry the one man who knew the town's darkest secret. Flynn helped her to her feet, his face a grim mask. The proposal was forgotten, replaced by a terrifying new reality. The man who wanted her gone, the man who held all the power in town, was a murderer. And now he knew that she and Flynn were a threat. The sheriff and his deputy moved toward the mayor, but Thompson was faster. He grabbed his wife, a small, terrified woman, and used her as a shield, pulling a small derringer from his coat pocket. "Stay back!" he screamed, his eyes wild. "Everyone stay back!" The townspeople scrambled away, creating a wide circle around the mayor, his whimpering wife, and the lawman. Flynn pushed Olivia behind him, his body a solid wall between her and the madman. "It's over, Thompson," the sheriff said, his voice calm, his own gun now drawn. "There's nowhere to go." "You think that book is enough?" Thompson spat, his face contorted with rage and fear. "No one will believe a half-breed's word over mine." He was talking about Flynn. The journal must have been found by Flynn, who then gave it to the sheriff. Flynn had been investigating the mayor all along. His kindness to Olivia hadn't been random. He'd seen her as an outsider, someone who wouldn't be loyal to the town's power structure, someone he could trust. "The book is just the start," Flynn said, his voice cutting through the tension. "Thomas Miller sent a letter to a judge in Sacramento before you got to him. He detailed everything. How you've been stealing from the town's coffers for years. How you killed your partner back in the gold rush and stole his claim, the very claim this town is built on." The mayor's eyes widened in shock. The secret was deeper and darker than just embezzlement. "That claim," Flynn continued, his voice dropping to a low, cold whisper, "belonged to my grandfather." The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. This wasn't just about money or power. This was a blood feud. Mayor Thompson had built his entire life on a foundation of theft and murder, stealing not just land, but a legacy from Flynn's family. And the previous teacher had uncovered it all. "Lies!" Thompson shrieked, waving the small pistol erratically. "All lies." He started backing toward the main door of the church, dragging his terrified wife with him. The crowd parted, a sea of frightened faces. "Don't anybody follow me!" Olivia's mind was racing. The mayor was unhinged. He would shoot his way out if he had to. She looked around, her eyes darting from the mayor to Flynn, to the heavy oak collection plate sitting on a nearby table. It was an impulsive, insane idea, but it was the only one she had. While all eyes were on the mayor, Olivia slipped away from behind Flynn. She crept along the side of the pews, her heart hammering so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. The mayor was almost at the door. He shoved his wife forward, preparing to make a run for it. Now or never. Olivia grabbed the heavy plate. It was surprisingly solid in her hands. With a scream born of terror and fury, she hurled it with all her might. The plate flew through the air, a spinning disk of dark wood, and caught the mayor square in the side of the head. The crack of wood against skull echoed through the silent church. He staggered, his eyes rolling back in his head, the derringer firing a single deafening shot into the ceiling. He crumpled to the floor in a heap. His wife scrambled away from him, sobbing. For a long moment, nobody moved. The smell of gunpowder hung in the air. Then, the sheriff and his deputy rushed forward, kicking the gun away and hauling the unconscious mayor to his feet. It was over. The secret that had poisoned Redemption Springs for decades was finally out in the open. The townspeople stared, their faces a mixture of shock, horror, and a dawning, terrible understanding. They hadn't just been prejudiced, they had been blind. They had allowed a monster to rule them, and in their fear of outsiders, they had almost let him destroy the only two people brave enough to stand up to him. Flynn rushed to Olivia's side, his hands checking her for injuries, his face pale with fear. "Are you all right? What were you thinking?" "I was thinking he wasn't going to get away," she said, her voice shaking. He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. She buried her face in his shoulder, the adrenaline finally giving way to a bone-deep exhaustion. The crowd of townspeople watched them, their expressions unreadable. They had judged her, hated her, tried to drive her away. And she had just saved them. Mrs. Holloway stepped forward, her usual sour expression replaced with something Olivia had never seen before. Respect. "That was a damn foolish thing to do, child," she said, her voice raspy. Then she looked at the collapsed mayor being dragged away. "And a damn fine one." In the days that followed, Redemption Springs was a town reborn. The truth about Mayor Thompson had shattered the old order. His cronies on the town council were disgraced, and the people who had blindly followed him were forced to confront their own willful ignorance. The investigation revealed everything. Thompson had lured Thomas Miller out to the old abandoned mine shaft under the pretense of discussing school funding, then pushed him in. He had been so arrogant, so sure of his power, that he believed no one would ever question the disappearance. He never counted on a man like Flynn Xavier, who had suspected Thompson's villainy for years, patiently gathering evidence. And he certainly never counted on a schoolteacher with mismatched eyes and a core of steel. There was another town meeting, but this time the atmosphere was completely different. It was held in the schoolhouse, which the townspeople had begun repairing themselves, led by a deeply ashamed Harold Jenkins. They offered Olivia a new contract, this one for life, with a raise in pay and a promise to build her a proper teacher's cottage next to the school. She accepted, but she told them she wouldn't be living in the cottage. Flynn stood beside her, his hand resting possessively on the small of her back. "Miss Zimmerman has already accepted another proposal," he announced to the stunned but smiling crowd. Their wedding was a week later, held in the same church where their lives had almost ended. The whole town came. They brought wildflowers to decorate the altar and platters of food for a celebration in the town square. Mrs. Holloway gave Olivia a handmade lace handkerchief. Every bride needs something new, she mumbled, avoiding Olivia's eyes. Reverend Caldwell performed the ceremony, his voice filled with genuine warmth. When Flynn lifted her veil and looked into her eyes, one blue, one green, there was no fear, no judgment. There was only love, a love that had been forged in danger and sealed in justice. "I promise," he said, his voice thick with emotion as he slipped the simple gold band on her finger, "to always see you, all of you, and to remind you every single day that you belong, right here, with me." That evening, they rode out to his ranch, the setting sun painting the sky in fiery strokes of orange and purple. From the top of a ridge, they could see the whole valley spread out below them. The small collection of buildings that was Redemption Springs, the winding creek, the vast open land that was now their home. "Welcome home, Mrs. Xavier," Flynn said softly. Olivia leaned against him, breathing in the scent of pine and horse, and the man she loved. She had come to this town a frightened outcast, looking for a place to hide. Instead, she had found a place to stand, a place to fight. She had found a home, not in the dirt and lumber of a town, but in the heart of a man who was as much of an outcast as she was. They had taken the town's ugliest secrets and dragged them into the light. And in doing so, they hadn't just saved Redemption Springs. They had redeemed it. The whispers about the peculiar girl with the mismatched eyes had finally stopped. Now, when they spoke of Olivia Xavier, they spoke of her with respect, with awe. They told the story of how she had faced down a murderer with nothing but a collection plate and a heart full of courage. The dust in Redemption Springs still settled on things, but it no longer buried secrets. Thanks to Olivia and Flynn, it was just dust. The past was settled, and the future was a clean, open page waiting for them to write their own story. And they knew, without a doubt, it would be a beautiful one. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you don't miss the next strange tale.